Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
If you or somebody you know is caring for a loved one, there's a lot of emotions, a lot of challenges that come in there. You worry about the future. You wonder if they're in pain. You wonder about all these things that you have to navigate, sometimes alone, but you don't have to do it alone. There's somebody that thankfully offers coaching for that to kind of walk your hand through the journey. And that's why we make her our professional of the year. She is Marika Humphreys, and she's back with us. And welcome. How you doing today?
I am doing pretty great, actually, which is nice. For a Monday, it's good.
No complaints. We're just going to keep that going. And we're going to be resilient. And that's what we're going to talk about today, resilience. And when you're going through those challenges of helping somebody else and navigating caregiving, you got to find the strength somewhere because giving up is not an option, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the challenges that makes caregiving particularly hard over some of the other challenges we go through in life is that it can last a long time. I mean, it obviously is very situation dependent, but often people are in caregiving roles for year to 2 years to, sometimes even a decade. And how do you stay resilient, or how do you build your resilience kind of in that process? I think that's a little, it just can be challenging.
Especially if this has just happened to you. I mean, not to say that it's any easier if you've been doing it for a period of time, but life is going on like this. Somebody gets ill. Now you're the caregiver. There's all new situations, and you don't walk away from the other situations, like maybe caring for your other family members, work, and all of that. Probably where I'm thinking the most resilience comes into play.
Yeah, I do think there is a major adjustment that you have to make. Like if you just stepped into the caregiving role. And again, I often use the term care partner as well, because I think caregiving, we tend to think of like a full-time role, and that the person you're caring for maybe can't do a lot of things by themselves. And a care partner is probably a little bit more of what my situation was, where my husband was making a lot of his own appointments and doing things, and he could still function fine on his own, but we made decisions together. So, but in both cases, adjusting to that role is significant. And that, I think, is one of the keys, is recognizing that you may have to rethink how you do the other things in your life, because caregiving and being a care partner both take a significant amount of mental energy, a huge amount of emotional energy, which is the one area I think that we discount. And then there's physical energy too. You're often just doing more things. I mean, there were certain things that my husband stopped doing and I started doing. And that's pretty common, I think, in a lot of caregiving relationships, where perhaps one person is just not able to, maybe they always mowed the lawn and now they simply can't, or they've gone through a surgery and they just are out for, recovering for a couple months, and they can't do those things. So the other person takes on those jobs, and I think we don't always see what those extra tasks are, but giving yourself a lot of space, and I like to say grace as well, like just knowing that this is going to be a transition. You may not see all that it's going to require, and know that but it will require more of you as a caregiver. And in the terms of energy and your emotional energy, and your time. So adjusting to that, I think, just requires awareness that this is not something that you can just add on. I think we talked about that a little bit last week as well. It's not just another thing to put on the to-do list, because that was my initial approach. And I think probably a lot of people that are like to do well in things. They just add it on their to-do list and try to get it all done. And you'll end up burning out is what often happens.
This is why you do what you do, because you bring up the point that you may be doing things that you never did before that really aren't even related to caregiving, like mowing the lawn or some of those things that the other person was doing. And we don't think of them until we have to do them. And be honest, sometimes we take it for granted that they're being done. And that's where you get that the aha moment, like, oh, all that time, I didn't realize what you went through when you did that kind of stuff. How do you, Marika, how do you deal with being overwhelmed, ups and downs, the emotions, when you feel that life is beating you down? How do you find the strength to crawl back up and keep going?
Yeah, I think that requires several things, and that's not easy to do. In caregiving, I think a lot of that some people feel overwhelmed in the beginning just at the prospect of what they're facing. Sometimes it takes a while, and then you just you try to, as we mentioned, do everything and take on all these tasks without making any adjustments. And so you start feeling overwhelmed and just burn out. Um, I think one of the things that I talk about a lot, because it's not something that most of us are aware of, is learning how to recognize that a lot of the mental anxiety and stress that we feel in caregiving and just going through the stress of whatever adjustment you're making, whether it's an illness or a permanent disability of your spouse or your partner, there's so many thoughts and worries, and our mind goes down rabbit holes. And one of the biggest skills that I think can be helpful, that again is not just a commonly taught skill, is learning to be both mindful of our thoughts and also kind of separate ourselves from them. I mean, that's a skill of mindfulness, which is, a lot more talked about these days. But how to do that is not super easy. But I think it's critical because our mind is just naturally, we tend to look for problems and things that can go wrong. And so when you're already in a stressful situation, you're going to just find everything that can possibly go wrong. And we can really just make ourselves utterly miserable when we don't realize that this is just a tendency of most human brains, is to kind of go to the negative place and worry about what's going to happen. And if you don't have a way of managing that in some way, you can just kind of get carried away with it. So I talk about it in terms of learning to manage your mind, which is kind of what it means, right? Or what the way I describe it, like we can let our mind kind of run wild, or we can learn to notice how our thoughts are and what we're tend to worried about. And then one of the things, like I think Ian, we talked about last time, was just journaling, writing all those thoughts down and just putting them on paper just to get them out of your head. So you can start to say, okay, some of these fears are just, just simply fears that, are probably not at all likely to happen, but they're there. And so you can get them out and sort of take a look at them on paper. So that's one of the things I think that helps people stay resilient. There are a number of others, but that's probably a big one. And then the other big one, I think, is also learning how to not be afraid of all the emotions that are going to come up. And what I mean by that is, again, as humans, we experience fear, sadness, anxiety, overwhelm, shame, guilt, selfishness. I mean, there is just a plethora of emotions. And my experience in caregiving was, and I think for a lot of caregivers, I call it the emotional roller coaster, because You can often go from feeling hopeful to feeling, dread and disappointment and hopeless, to feeling, maybe a little anxious. And it's just kind of one thing after another after another. And most of us don't like that kind of emotional turmoil, and it is difficult, but you can learn ways to sort of allow those emotions without letting them take you away, because they're going to come up anyway. So those two skills are really connected. What we think about obviously has a lot to do with how we're going to feel. So if we're dreading the worst case scenario, then we're going to feel anxious and on edge. So understanding the connection between, what your mind is thinking about and then how you feel is, again, just helpful to manage your mind and your emotions during this time.
The term rabbit hole is used a lot where we're going down the rabbit hole here. It seems that if you're a caregiver, it's so easy to go down that rabbit hole of, oh my gosh, look at that. Then we've got this. Then how am I going to do that? Then as you're going down and down and down further, where it's a challenge. I take that away from nobody. It's not easy. But sometimes, like you said, our minds go to the negative. And I think we're wired through evolution for that to happen, to protect us, to be prepared for what could happen. But that doesn't support us. So in my mind, that's where you need a coach to walk that journey with you, to make you realize that, it's a challenge, but it's going to be okay. We'll figure it out. When it comes to self-care of the caregiver, how do you get to that point where you have to hire somebody else, even if it's, or ask for help or whatever, even if it's for a few hours a week, just to get out, just to have a little bit of freedom, breath of fresh air, all of that? That's my first question. My second question, and I know somebody I'm very close to where I've suggested this to them, and I know that the person they're caring for won't have it because they have their pride and all of that, and they don't want anybody coming in and taking care of them and all of that. So two-part question. How do you deal with both?
Yeah, as far as getting help, I think, and whether that's, asking for help or hiring help, I think the first part of that is, a lot of people struggle with feeling like they are deserving, I guess, of help. I think there's a couple things. Like, first of all, just recognizing that you need support and that's okay is a hurdle to overcome for a lot of people. Not everybody struggles with that. I know I did. And for people that kind of have a belief that they should be independent and should be handle things on their own, asking for help is always hard.
Mm.
And also, many people are like, would love to give help to anybody who would offer, but they hate asking for it. So when we're because we feel vulnerable if we have to ask for help. Sometimes we think of it as, I have to ask for help.
Yeah.
So the first step is overcoming that. And I had to do this myself. I really, my husband and I, we were going to start a GoFundMe account, which is for those, it's kind of a public, it's a way to get sort of financial help from friends and family members. Often people do it for around illnesses or hospital stays and stuff. And there's websites to do that. And we had talked about it, and I just needed to, like, literally just super simple to do, but I could not get myself to do it. And I realized, with actually working with a coach at the time, that it was because I felt, it made me feel vulnerable to ask others for help. And then I felt like I shouldn't need help from others. So I had to work through that kind of internal blockage to do that. And once I realized, when I see other people asking for help, I actually kind of think they're courageous, because it does take courage to ask for help when you need it. So once I sort of flipped it on its head and thought, this actually takes a lot of courage to ask for help, I was able to work through it. So I think that's the first step, is just asking for help and accepting help too. That a lot of people will offer, if they know your situation, tell me how I can help. And we rarely take them up on it because it feels awkward, or I don't want to put them out, or they're just offering to be nice. But the biggest thing is, if we don't have to, you can let people say no. That's one thing too. I think we forget that people are allowed to say no. So, and what I tell my clients a lot of times is, people don't know what help you need unless you very clearly tell them. So you can say, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. Like, one of the things that a friend of mine helped me with was, she hired a house cleaner. And it was like, and this was a close friend. So it, while that may be something that's sort of, not everybody would do, but this was a close friend, but it was like the best gift ever that she could have, given, because it was just, having a clean house and you're overwhelmed and you're tired. But just telling people, hey, I could use a couple hours away and I just need someone to be there in case something happens. I mean, being super clear with what you need help with is both okay to do, and if people aren't comfortable with it, you can always give them an out too. Like, look, if you're not comfortable with this, please just tell me. It's totally fine. So you have to kind of work through, I think, some of the hangups we have around asking for help, but that is really probably the critical part. And then once you get over the hangups that you may have around it, asking for help, people are really amazing. I mean, I truly believe that. I had an amazing support, and I think there is tons of support out there, whether it's people there's even organizations that do this, like for volunteers. There's some amazing resources out there. So help is available. And I think one of the advice I would give for people who are new to caregiving is, get it sooner than you think you need it, because that's I think another thing that we tend to try to manage it all on our own, and that's hard to do.
Can I interject in here? That is probably the most important thing, what you just said. Get it sooner than you think you need it, because a lot of us will wait until you're in DEFCON 5 before you ask for anybody to help. Number one, what you said is fantastic in terms of being specific, because then it manages the expectations of you and the other person, so they know what's needed and what they're doing. But if you wait, when you're at that point where, I can't do it anymore, I'm like, now you've already put yourself into an emotional spin where it's even worse. So if you would have asked, a period of time sooner, a couple of months, whatever it might be, it's going to be so much more impactful getting that help.
Yeah, and it prevents you. Ideally, you don't get to that burnout stage in the first place.
Thank you. Word burnout. Thank you. That was keyword.
Yes, because that's an awful place to be. It's just an awful place to be, and when you're there, it's hard to just manage anything. So yes, you want to get. Ideally, you can always say no to help, right? But having it set up, reaching out to friends. Another thing that I sometimes recommend for people to do is, sometimes you get overwhelmed with offers of help, or just offers of like, it's a happy problem, but it can feel overwhelming, and like a lot of people coming at you, tell me what you need, how can I help? And a lot of times I suggest to people, if they have a close friend or a close family member that can act as a proxy, essentially, so act on your behalf and sort of manage for you. Like, you talk to your, let's just say it's a sister or something. I'm just, and your sister, you talk to your sister and say, okay, these are the really things we, help with meals, help mowing the lawn, and, somebody to just help me do the laundry or whatever. And then that person can sort of, reach out and maybe either ask, reach out to the friends or manage the people that have already offered and say, hey, would you be willing to do this? So that's another strategy that can be really useful and kind of helps, just makes it easier on the person going through that.
And if you're not ready at that moment, you can always say, I really appreciate that. Listen, I may be calling you soon. So just letting you know. So at least you haven't closed the door. You left the door open, and stack a few of those up and circle back when you're ready. Because I get it. You know, sometimes your pride comes into play. Sometimes the person you're caring for isn't having it at that time. When you're in that situation, how do you tell that person that you're caring for, we need Beth to come in here. My friend Beth, she's going to come in and she's going to clean the bathrooms and all that. I'm going to go get a massage. Got a couple hours and that's it. Need the help. How do you deliver that?
Yeah, it can be challenging. And I think part of that depends on the relationship you have already. And a lot of this, like having a conversation like that is helpful. This is where a coach can be really helpful because you want to work whatever your anxieties are about having that relationship, especially if the person, right, that you're caring for is like, nope, don't want it, or I only want you here. I mean, I've definitely, that comes up a lot. Like, you're the only one I want around, or I don't want anybody else, or whatever the opposition might be. You recognizing, I mean, this is kind of where acknowledging that your need for time away or just some downtime or, to take your mind off it is important. And as caregivers, we tend to say, okay, well, it's not as, my needs kind of aren't as important as theirs right now. So I think that's the first step, is just acknowledging to yourself and feeling okay that it's okay for you to take time. Like, your needs are important and it's okay for you to take time to do that. So that's, I think, one of the first parts, is just feeling good about that. Because if you're all doubting it, you're just going to, kind of put their needs always ahead of yours. And that over time will build resentment. And that's also another terrible place to be.
If you're in that, and your final thought on that situation, if you're there, is it reasonable enough to, let's say you honor their wishes to a point, and now you're at the point where I need a break, to just say, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in any relationship, there, I think one of the things, like, if you have two healthy people, that's what you would say, right? If it came down to a point where you're sacrificing your well-being for theirs,
yeah,
you wouldn't do that. Or ideally you wouldn't do that. I mean, people do that, but that causes problems. So in a relationship with two healthy people, it's easier to think, no, I need to do this for me, and you wouldn't second guess it as much. When one person is not healthy, in that caregiving relationship, that's where I think we feel guilty about it. But it creates the same problem. Like, if you don't take care of yourself, what will happen is you'll just end up becoming really resentful, and that will, not be great for the relationship either. So while it may seem easier to just give in the moment, then it just creates resentment later on. But it could be a challenging conversation, and it may be something that, I understand, you don't like this, but this is something I need to do for me. And, and sometimes maybe there's a way to have a win-win. Like, how can we both, how can we find a time for me to get away and that meets your needs? Thinking of it, like, sometimes I think win-win is another thing that we don't always think about. But if not, too, like, just because they're, not fully, like, you're in a caregiving relationship, doesn't mean you have to feel guilty about.
Sure. And add another layer of challenge. Let's say it's a senior, and sometimes they can be a little stubborn, or somebody going through, let's say, physical challenges, Parkinson's, where, it's add a layer of challenge. Before that conversation is had, I would have that conversation with you, because it's almost as if I would need somebody whispering in my ear, as to how to navigate it and how to take care of it. But I guess this is all part of the resilience, and part of that resilience that you help the people that you work with gain or keep. Marika, how do we find you?
Yeah, my webpage is probably the best place to go. On my webpage, coachmarika.com. And there you will find a link to my podcast. You can get on my email list from there as well. So yeah, coachmarika.com.
There's nobody in my mind like you. It is so important. So many people are in this challenge of being a caregiver, and you can talk to other coaches, other therapists, but they're not going to have the spin on it as you will, because you've done it, you've been there, and you've coached so many people through all of this. So for that, I appreciate you, and congrats on being our professional of the year. And thanks for being with us today.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Good talking to you again.
We'll talk soon. And we're coming right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.